Gee, it's good to be here. I've got a confession to make. I think the last time I was here, we were facing that way, or that way. So that's how long. That's terrible. Isn't it? Oh, good. Is it? Oh, okay. I feel a little bit better. And I also got my second apology. I'm getting off to a good start. Is that Carly Cassidy isn't here with you? She's currently in Adelaide, South Australia, and NT Churches of Christ are having their state conference this weekend, and we're GMP or Global Mission Partners. We've been invited to participate there too. So Carly's wanted to be here, but I'm the sort of, I'm like in the trade week. I'm that kind of, who are some of the players that Collingwood's picking up late in the draft? That's me. That's who you're getting today. No, but thank you. I also, my third confession, here we go, last one for now. I'm not much of a preacher, but I am deeply passionate about Indigenous ministry and reconciliation in our land and about the work of Global Mission Partners. So if I can, I'm just going to share mostly like peeling back the covers a bit and a bit of our inside kind of news, a bit of our strategy and where we're at. Is that okay if we do that? Right. Now I'm going to see how we go with our slides. Excellent. So just so you get the picture again, of course, you guys know this is an amazing church. I'm a little bit blown away by that. Over $10,000 just in that for those 3 GMP programs is off the charts. I think that's incredible. An incredible sign of your generosity and your hearts in mission. But you can kind of see how the 4 program areas fit within Global Mission Partners there. At least you can with the logos, right? So my specific role is heading up the Australian programs, if you like, or I think my latest job title is National Manager for IMA. But really quickly, let's cover off some of the things you've already talked about. Obviously the visit, I'm not going to tell you much news about BJ and Chippo. You have to come along to one on the, let's get the date right, the 17th. Thank you. I'm glad you guys know. So that's going to be really exciting to hear from them directly. In Bangladesh, just a really couple of quick touch points there. Over 60 women were trained in 2023 through that one of the Community Advancement Forum programs. They want to reach over 1,000 women with that program. But just to let you know, something that's really been facing Bangladesh, and particularly in the Bundaman Hills area most recently, is a government crackdown. There's been some basically student-led political protests, which we've seen in a lot of countries around the world. This has had a really significant impact on our partners there. So please be praying for them. The government, there's been curfews, shutdowns of offices. Our partners have had many restrictions placed on them. They've been unable to travel, which is they need to do for this work. Food and even their banking and bank accounts, they haven't been able to access. So this is really, please keep them in your prayers in particular. And John Owl, you can see John Lamerton and Kathy there at the front, and you might recognise Colin Scott at the back there of that photo. They're able to visit our partners, LaFosse and CMI in particular, and I know you guys have been faithful supporters of CMI in particular too. But when it says South Sudan, in fact, they couldn't even get into Sudan. There's conflict in Sudan itself. There's over 500,000 refugees displaced who have primarily come into South Sudan. So most of the conflict's in the north, where the 2 countries join, and one of our partners, of course, is operating in the north as well. So they're able to meet in Kenya instead. And just to top it all off, if that wasn't difficult enough, there actually has been really significant flooding in South Sudan as well, just in the last month. So that in turn has displaced another 250,000 people. So that's heading towards 1 million people displaced in South Sudan, unable to live in their homes and having to move. So this is, but our partners, it was an amazing time for them to actually meet and share what actually God has been doing in and through these programs, despite the incredible difficulties they're facing. Oh, Great Gifts, you mentioned the Great Gifts catalogue. There it is there, please jump on board. That's a great way to support. I want to promote the IMA gifts as well too, Heather, if that's all right too. So there's some great gifts in there, and I'm going to share a little bit about some of the programs, if that's okay, that IMA is involved in as well. Something else, I didn't get a slide, I didn't get a chance to give you a slide because it's hot off the press. Safe Water September. Anybody here participate in Safe Water September? Sometimes, well, good news, because even in all your past efforts, but we've actually, against kind of the odds, because it is a tough economic climate here in Australia, we've just surpassed our total of 170,000, so we're a bit over that now for the Safe Water September. So that goes to not just Zimbabwe now, but some of our other water-based projects as well. All right. I think I've got, that's most of the, and I'm really sorry, I feel like I've got too much news. Is that such a thing? All right. And I know that, you know, as I say, I'm really passionate about all these things, but I just want to share them in a more of a newsy sort of format, if that's okay. So firstly, before I talk to you about the IMA specific news, and I always like to give acknowledgement to those who have gone before us in particular. So previously, what was known in the Churches of Christ right from the 1940s, now, those of you that love AFL, you might know the Sir Doug Nicholls round in the AFL, the Indigenous round. Well, clearly Sir Doug Nicholls was part of the founding of the Churches of Christ Indigenous ministry work in the 1940s. In fact, he actually beseeched the churches, being in his own denomination, he said, come on board with me and please. And that was actually also, believe it or not, the beginnings of what became Aboriginal Sunday and what now is celebrated by all Aboriginal people, NAIDOC Week. So we have a rich kind of history here that we're standing on in terms of the foundation. So in the very early days, it was known as FAB, which I think has Thunderbirds kind of connotations for those that know the Thunderbirds, but it was the Federal Aborigines Board, or the Federal Aborigines Board of Mission. And then it became ACM, Australian Churches of Christ Indigenous Ministries. And about 12, 13 odd years ago, when ACM was really struggling in a newer sort of a climate, Global Mission Partner said, look, we can take you on as one of our program areas. So we just want to recognise that, acknowledge that history. There's a sign from Carnarvon, some of the very earliest, in fact, actually there might be Norseman. The very first mission established within the Churches of Christ was in Norseman in WA, and then Carnarvon up north not long after that. And here's where we actually have active partnerships now around Australia. We also have some, and I'll talk about them really briefly, we have some associate partners that we're looking to enter into stronger agreements with, which is actually really exciting who they actually are too. So Dayton, you might know, and I think you guys have actually supported us at Dayton, I actually do have some really exciting news. There's 2 new board members, and is everybody on social media here, on Instagram? And did anyone see the Brother Boys on Instagram? You need to follow, Brother Boys? If you don't, please look them up. I promise you it's a good one. Kieran is an Indigenous young man from Mildura, and his brother-in-law, hence they are the Brother Boys, is one of the Waters family grandsons, if you like, who are originally from Dayton and who were originally part of the vision of establishing the ministry up there. Well, together they have a sort of a funny comedic relationship because Chris, I think his name is, suffers from, doesn't suffer from, but he's lives with Down syndrome. And so the two of them have this really amazing comedic kind of relationship. Well, both of them are now getting involved in the centre, and Kieran's come on the board with the centre and actually has a lot of influence and a lot of passion as young Christian men. We also have Will Ward come on board, who's also with his wife. Will's involved in the community as an Indigenous man. His wife is one of the leading Noongar language teachers, not Noongar, but Barkindji language teachers for that whole region up there. So this is a real injection of energy, of Indigenous wisdom and thinking and of Christian faith into the centre. So it's about to be incorporated, which means sort of standing on its own 2 legs, if you like, for the first time. And that's going to allow it to actually even access, hopefully, even more funding and support. So please, if you ever get a chance and you want to come up with me on a trip up there, I'd love you to come up. We can camp out by the Murray River, if you like. I love getting the swag out down by the river and having a campfire, and then go and hang out with the kids in the centre. It's a lot of fun and really beautiful, actually, in what has been quite a disadvantaged community. At one stage, about 15 years ago, they described themselves as the worst community in New South Wales. And statistics, unfortunately, did back that up. But since the centre's come along, and it's not just the centre, but certainly in the time the centre's been there, those statistics have been heading in the right direction. Melbourne Indigenous Church Fellowship, of course, really important. Please pray for Yongil Kim. That's Lonnie Bendesta, you can see holding the cross as he graduated actually from Ridley College in Melbourne. Lonnie's originally from South Australia and originally from the Ceduna actually, so reasonably sort of remote. But he's now moved back to Adelaide to be as an associate pastor in the Berean Aboriginal Church there in Adelaide. Whereas Kim is still in ministry in the Melbourne Indigenous Church. And I probably just need to mention, for those that may know Pastor Dennis Atkinson and Auntie Maureen Atkinson, Dennis passed away only 2 weeks ago, and his funeral was just last week up in Moama. And Dennis was a giant of a figure, I guess, in Indigenous ministry in the whole country. He's kept, through family lines, he's related to Sir Doug Nicholls and people like William Cooper. In fact, he officiated at the funeral for Sir Doug Nicholls' state funeral. So his own ceremony was held just recently. So please remember Maureen and family in your prayers too. Tia Tukia, that is right out at Ceduna. Again, an amazing community, sort of in the middle of nowhere, really. All these incredible families, and their church name is Jilgamuda, if you can remember that. I'm going to test you on it afterwards. So, Jilgamuda. You can tell me it's Tia Tukia. And the Bunbury Aboriginal Church Fellowship, we're working really closely with them at the moment. They're exploring what it is to maybe also to have an incorporated association, because it's a model we're sort of recommending with some of our communities going forward, because it means they can have a greater degree of control over their assets and programs as well. That's right down just 2 hours south of Perth, if you've been over that way. And Port Hedland. Port Hedland is in an interesting place at the moment. It's probably best described now as more of a multicultural church. It was almost on its last legs, I guess, as a faith congregation when they lost their pastor, David Moses Martin, only 2 years ago. And it really struggled. But since then, some locals have come in and actually helped re-establish and reinvigorate the church. So continue to hold them in your prayers. But essentially, it's a really mixed congregation now with Indigenous people as well as, I don't know if anyone's been out that way. You ever seen any of the big iron ore mines out that way? Between Newman and Port Hedland, it's just a whopping big port town with half the iron in our country going out through there. So many workers coming and going. And yet it feels a bit desolate because it's on the edge of the desert, and there's not many trees to look at, but there's lots of big machinery around. But it's incredibly expensive to live there because of the mining, of course, and the workers. So it's quite a complex place. Les there, wonderful Les. If he's not jetting around speaking at the United Nations, he's somewhere else in the world. But he's a strong Christian leader of the Nudju people. So if you keep coming, if you ever drive from Perth back this way or from this way over to Perth, you'll go through their country. It's out in the Norseman area and towards the border with South Australia. Again, really remote but beautiful sort of woodland area. But please pray for them as well. We've got Sonny Graham is one of the most esteemed kind of leaders within not just Churches of Christ and Indigenous ministry, but certainly as Indigenous Christians in the land. He's very, very elderly now, and he's in a home. And we're planning a celebration of his life just a little bit later, as his 86th birthday is next month. And we're hoping to do that down in Esperance with a whole lot of the other Indigenous Christians within that area and right across to Bunbury and so on. But Sonny was actually mentored by Sir Doug here in Melbourne. First ever Aboriginal person to go to the Churches of Christ Bible College in Victoria, and then I went back and essentially established most of the ministry there in WA. But we're talking about that their building in Norseman itself is most likely the church hasn't been meeting there now for a couple of years, and it's most likely we're in discussions with the local land council, the Nudju Land Council, that building will actually be handed back to the land council, which is actually a good thing. And in fact, what we're going to do is work with them to then look at how we can still partner as a church with community-based programs that run out of that building. Right, how are we going? You with me, mostly, still? They're our partners that we're working with right now, as they actually are. But if I can, I'm just going to take the last couple of minutes just to give you a quick snapshot. And I say quick, so I need you to just make hand motions about speed it up, because otherwise I'm too passionate about it. And this is why, my preacher friends tell me, oh, you can nail that. You can probably boil that down into a few more points, bullet points, Nick. But if I can, indulge me a little bit. I'm just going to go a little bit deep, but hopefully quickly. But I'm open to hand signals telling me to speed it up. A reconciled Australia, restored to God and all Australians to each other. That's just what we want to see. That's all we want to see, and that's what we're working towards. So what's the current kind of climate? Oh, sorry, before we go there, here's a Bible passage I just love. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them, and he has committed to us this message. That's it. That's a better version than my little title, but that's pretty much it. So what's the current climate like? Really quickly, a snapshot. And hopefully, you couldn't hang in there long enough to hear that it's not all doom and gloom, but it might sound like that a little bit. Basically, there is a decline in donation giving, a long-term trend towards a decline in this. Churches across, even us as a denomination, we sort of peaked probably somewhere in the 70s and 80s, and we acquired a lot of properties and assets in that time. But there's been a whole lot of forces that meant that those things are actually changing. There's been a greater concentration in philanthropic giving, and that's not a bad thing. It's just difficult. It means that if you like, there's less individual philanthropic funds around, and you actually still have to do a lot of hard work to actually access those. Increasing costs associated with staffing, plant and equipment. We all know that, don't we? It's really, really hard to pay people, and it's really, really hard to maintain and keep buildings. And the same goes for our Indigenous partners. They're all facing ageing infrastructure, those that do have access to buildings. And the compliance and the regulatory environment is just getting tougher and more complex. Have you guys found that to be true? Yeah. It's the same all over, isn't it? I'm sure half the time you feel like you're just filling out paperwork. There's an ageing leadership, an ageing lay membership. There are still lasting COVID impacts. We all feel that and know that too. Sadly, there's been a decline in culturally relevant training opportunities for Indigenous ministry and pastors. There's also been a decline in any sort of paid ministry roles. There's very, very few. So even if you were young, so Lonnie is up against it. He really is. He's got a really good friend who went to Moore College in Sydney. The two of them are two of the only young Indigenous people I know doing that kind of training. They're both having to go back to their same home church because they're such close mates. And that one little Aboriginal church in Adelaide, it's one of only two in Adelaide, is at the moment looking to, it's affiliated with the Baptists, and the Baptists are nationally working really hard to how can they support just two. That's the whole country of Baptists, and they sort of outnumber us a bit, don't they, the Baptists? So they're struggling as to how to even support two young men who are just graduating in ministry training. There's also the impacts of inequality, injustices and trauma. So not only are we just talking about the broader climate that we all get impacted by, but there actually is, there's a lack of culturally appropriate governance, partner frameworks and leadership pathways. And what I mean by culturally appropriate, it's just about being safe, culturally safe, feeling that you're seen and heard and known. That's all it is. There are unique challenges facing, like Lonnie's had to travel halfway across the country to study. It's a miracle he stuck out his study. He was supported reasonably well, but a lot of the cultural aspects of how he wanted to connect and stay connected with family and with elders and so on weren't very well understood in what is essentially a rigid, structured curriculum. There's ongoing impacts of intergenerational trauma, and there's little to no capital assets. So if you think about it, often a lot of our resources come from the fact that we actually can own things. And we might own homes or even our church buildings or whatever it might be. That's not the case with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. They do not have, and there's a whole lot of historical reasons for that, they just do not own those kind of assets and therefore lack opportunities to just go to banks and say, listen, I've got an asset. Can we get a loan? All right. So there's some of the bad news, if you like. Well, that's the content. That's just our reality. That's our current reality. What do we want to partner with God to see? Even in the context of that reality. Healthy, sustainable Indigenous faith communities. Trusting relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and communities based on mutuality, justice and humility. And a reconciled Australia restored to God and all Australians to each other, like we said at the start. It's a bit of a big aspiration, isn't it? If that was sort of bad news, then how do we get to see that? So what's our role at IMA now? We're not immune to those things too. At Global Mission Partners, we're facing our challenges, but we've actually got a really strong plan moving forward, a really strong plan for the whole of our organisation. And we actually are doing really well in terms of resourcing that. Now, I need to say here really quickly, the one thing I didn't put in the context there is that we at Churches of Christ, and something that's impacted us significantly, and I know I can share this in the trusting love of our family of faith and a family of Churches of Christ, we're facing an enormous challenge with the National Redress Scheme too. We at Churches of Christ are actually part of that. We have opted into the National Redress Scheme. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of that, but very, very sadly, through some of that historical work, we have a number of cases and claims against the Churches of Christ for institutional abuse. But we are stepping up to that. The whole Churches of Christ nationally, state by state, have all agreed to opt into that and are addressing that. And the majority of those cases are found to be through the redress scheme, which is a government, it's designed to avoid the court system, of course, and to provide a whole lot better access and truth-telling, I guess, and healing through that too. So we're participating in that too. But it has come at a significant financial cost to the whole of the Churches of Christ, and certainly to us in our programs as well. But the good news is we're participating in it and we're meeting those obligations. So what is our role now? To prioritise relationships based on cultural sensitivity, trust and mutuality. Nothing will get done and nothing good will come if we don't have the foundation of trusting relationships. I know you guys know that. But we can have the world's best programs, but if there isn't that trust, there's no, those programs will die on the vine. To adopt a trauma-informed understanding, as I mentioned before, those traumas actually are real, they're lasting, those impacts that we still see and we hear about in the news. And sadly, most of us sometimes only get our understanding of Indigenous communities from the news, don't we? Which in itself is problematic because that just perpetuates a lot of the separation and the judgment at times. We want to always, and these are some of the values we really live by at Global Mission Partners, to respond to Indigenous leadership. So our programs are based on Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous thinking. We work really closely with our Indigenous partners and they say, here are the things we want to do. That's how we come up with our program. That's how we come up with what we do. And to develop new initiatives out of the context of those relationships. We trust that the relationships, we don't feel like we have to solve problems that don't necessarily even exist. We out of the context of those relationships, the programs naturally will come out of that. Does that sort of make sense? When you get to know each other, then you can get to a place of real trust and say, oh, okay, that sounds like a really good idea. Right, I said I'd speed through this. How are we going? This is our approach, and this shouldn't be new to any of you, but it's basically what's called an asset-based approach to mission. So the needs-based, and this is what can overwhelm us at times. I talked about all those big contextual issues that look like they're real challenges. Sometimes they can overwhelm us. The need can overwhelm us. And the need is actually real, but if we have an exclusive or only a needs-based approach, it sort of works like this. Its starting question is, what's wrong with you? How can I fix you? How are you broken? What do you need from me? It's not a good starting point, is it, to overcoming this dynamic? It starts off at exactly the foot that we want to avoid. What needs-based development does, it assumes that the solutions and the resources will come from outside of the individual or the community. It says, you're poor, you're Indigenous, you can't do it. This solution is going to come from the outside of you. It sets them up for expecting something to be brought in to save them, which is exactly what we want to get away from. So what needs-based development fails to do is to identify and to mobilise the asset or the person or the community. So what we're doing instead is moving what's most often called, I guess, asset-based. So if our goal is restoration, the goal is for people to have a sense that they're made in the image of God. He has blessed them with gifts, all kinds of gifts, physical resources, social resources, spiritual resources. And we work together on stewardship of those resources and developing them as well. Asset-based development starts off with what's right. It focuses on the capabilities, skills and resources of the individual or the community, asking the question, what gifts has God given you and your community? What is your vision for yourself, your family and your community? Does that sort of make sense? Yeah, hopefully it does, because it can be challenging because we know that the needs are very, very often visibly present. There's no doubting that. But if we work together in a way that's both trauma-informed and has justice at the heart of it, this asset-based actually also respects and acknowledges deep wisdom, God-given wisdom that is given to Indigenous people that I believe is right before our eyes, but for a whole host of reasons we don't actually see and don't value. So what could it look like? Here we go. We're going to bring this thing home. Autonomous, this is what it could look like. This is a real dream of what it could look like. Autonomous, interdependent and sustainable Indigenous faith communities. That's a big dream. Positive impacts on having positive impacts on their local communities. Deeper and more meaningful intercultural relationships. I believe there's a real gift for our whole country and our nation. If we think, look, we don't know, and I know there's historically a strong Indigenous community down here in Warragul. Warragul, Druin, Jackson's Track, is that right? Just up the road. Incredible stories, local stories you have here. But often we get a little bit overwhelmed by the needs, don't we? We don't see this rich, deep vein of God-given beauty that's sitting there. Place-based, that means local really, ownership of new and renewed initiatives. So local always wins out. And multi-generational involvement. It's just as much an issue for us in the wider church, isn't it? It certainly is an issue for the Indigenous church. They struggle with not just intercultural, but intergenerational connections. Where are our young people? There are no jobs in ministry. There are jobs in every other sector. There's jobs in mining, or there's jobs in health, or whatever else. What does this mean vocationally? Right, I did say I'm really close to the end. Where are we at right now? And this is the bit I'm going to race through. So the new programs that we've brought in the last few years, Songlines, and Heather, let's do it together. Let's do a Saturday sometime next year. I promise you it's more fun than not. We go through a whole bunch of sites in Melbourne. There's gelati in the middle. Don't worry about that. It's really good fun. But the sites are where historical things have happened in the early foundations, essentially, of our state and our city, the city of Melbourne. And we reflect on those things as a prayer walk and as a cultural and historical thing. So please come with me on a Songlines tour. We're doing it in Adelaide. We've got retreats in the Flinders Ranges now in South Australia. Similarly with the Dian community. These are those intercultural relationships that I talked about. Jurakai as well, up on the Bundjalung people on the northern New South Wales coast and around Tweed Heads. And we're doing spiritual retreats as well as the immersive retreats in those places. IMA Pathways, that's a mentoring program. So Lonnie that you saw in that photo before was a recipient of that. It's essentially saying we haven't got the resources to actually do the training, but what we can do is help find culturally appropriate training and put wraparound support around that. Bring in elders and mentors where they're needed, allow for travel, supply books and materials needed for study, things that might normally be accessible and that are culturally relevant. And what we're just calling knowledge exchange. We're planning for a big national gathering for Indigenous leaders next year. We're probably going to work with our Baptist brothers in that and sisters in that. Cultural intelligence training for key leaders in the wider church. So this is the mutuality. This is the really important two-way learning. If we might give support through finances and through capacity building, but in turn, what do we receive back? Deep cultural and Indigenous wisdom back. So it's a really important dynamic. And lastly, consulting and knowledge exchange around social enterprise and other new models of ministry. That's really exciting. We need to move in this direction. That's the sustainability piece. So when we talk about the incorporated associations and so on, running local Indigenous communities, running art programs, cultural awareness programs, coffee vans, that kind of thing. It's really vital. It's that kind of grassrootsy stuff like that. So I think that's it. Let me just see what I've got there. Oh, that's our long-term partner. So those partners that I already mentioned before, that's how we're working with them as well. We're working with them around capacity building with their governance. How does Indigenous governance and corporate governance work together? Because they are very different things. And certainly around them doing that, looking into social enterprise and the tent maker models of ministry too, which I just mentioned. Phew, we got there. And I'm going to race through these because these are the promo slides. So there's the Songlines one. Let's talk about it. It's going to be a lot of fun next year. Heather and I will work on it. Is that right? Okay, great. That's the Dion on country one. So if you want to do that, that's a longer one, 3 days up there. Amazing, in depth, on country with an Aboriginal faith-based organisation and community. Similar in the Flinders Ranges, that's stunning where we go out there, a great spot out there on Nukanu and Adnyamatna country. If you know Adam Goods, he's Adnyamatna man, that's his home country up there. Derton, well, let's go up there together, that'll be fun. We'll camp down on the Murray. And there's our Pathways program as well. Phew. Thank you. I know that was a lot. That was a lot, wasn't it? I feel like I just was a big download. That was everything that was in my head to share with you, but I'm so thankful. I just wanted to really share that. And to be honest, I wanted to test it on you guys because I'm going to the Churches of Christ, the Federal Council in 2 weeks. And I'm pretty much going to share the same thing with them. They don't know it yet, and then not only that, we're going to share probably a similar thing again in WA with all of the supported churches over there at the end of November. So you were like my guinea pig. Feedback, I'm open to it. If you want to come back and say, that was too long, Nick, you lost me at the first slide, any of that, I'm open to. So thank you. You've been really generous and really gracious with your time. I can't thank you enough for the support, particularly for Derden. It's exciting times up there in the Derden ministry, but hopefully that just gives you that really quick overview of that we are in a big time of change. There is no doubt. The context is difficult, but God is faithful and God will have his way in our land. So come on board. Is that all right? Thank you, Warragul.